Okay, so we should be recording. So real quick, if you're not familiar with the Weston A. Price Foundation, I just encourage you to hop on over to westonaprice.org. Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts, which is kind of what actually sparked my interest in sourdough. So you'll see they're about a lot more than sourdough, but that's what we're going to focus on tonight. And I have the free version of Zoom, so it's only going to be 40 minutes. However, if we end up like running out of time and there was some key things that we wanted to, cover yet, we'll just go ahead and use the link, the same link that I gave you. If it closes out, just use that same link, hop back on, and we can kind of do a Q&A or anything like that if we need it. So without further ado, I guess we will jump in. For those that are going to be listening to the recording, my name's Julia, this is Amanda, and we were planning to do this class for you. Amanda was. I'm a beginner, and we were going to do it in March. We had to cancel, so here we are. And also, in the midst of the last couple of weeks, Amanda actually gave me a sourdough starter, my first one ever. I guess I'll show you one of these, and instructed me how to take care of it. We're going to go over that later in the Zoom, but here we are. We're making my very first ever loaf. So yeah, I'm going to have questions. If you guys have questions,
yeah, let us know if you have any questions. And I know Julia mentioned that she's a brand new beginner, but I also kind of consider myself a little bit of a beginner as well. I've been kind of diving into the sourdough thing for the last few months. And while I do have some good experience, I know there's others that might be on here. I know, Janice, you've done a lot of sourdough baking as well, that if there are any questions that you might be able to help us answer, we'd appreciate that.
Yes, anyone feel free to chime in. We always say that's the beauty of this. We all learn together. So
do we need to shift the camera down, do you think?
Just like this way, or?
I don't know.
Okay, technical stuff here.
Is there a way for us to see our screen, like what?
Bigger, you mean? Yeah, let's.
Bear with us, guys.
I'm gonna accidentally end it. Does anyone know? Ooh, here.
That's a little better.
Okay. We just want to know like what's in the view for you.
Go.
Do you mind if I show them the loaf?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is the loaf that we're going to be making. And I have to admit, I have sampled not this one, but the same style of Amanda's bread, and it is fabulous. I will not tell you how short of a time my husband and I consumed it. It was pretty quick.
So this loaf is, I feel, a really good introductory loaf if you're, if you're new to sourdough, or if you don't want to spend a lot of time, taking all the steps, setting timers to make sure that you're doing all the folding steps of a conventional recipe. This is the name of the recipe is an overnight, no knead artisan loaf, and the recipe is actually from this Einkorn cookbook by Carla Bartolucci. In case anyone has that book already or would be interested in baking with Einkorn. So as Julia said, we will definitely be discussing how to maintain your starter and maintenance feedings and that kind of thing, but we are going to go ahead with this bread recipe, and we'll come back to that later. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is how to tell when your starter is ready to be baked with after you've done a feeding. So there are a few ways to tell. Yeah. So there are visual cues and there are smell cues. So I hope you can see here that there are lots of little bubbles here, and maybe you can even see some bubbles on top.
Yeah, let's go like that.
Yeah. There are some open bubbles there. And one thing that we like to look for is whether there is some doming that's occurring on the top of the starter. So as the bacteria and yeast are working their way through the sugar and starches that are in the flour, you get this buildup of carbon dioxide that'll push the starter up, and you'll get that doming effect. So that's a really good sign that they're doing their jobs. And basically there is what they call a peak time to start using your starter for baking bread. It's not as important if you're baking things that don't require a big rise. So like pizza crusts, pancakes, tortillas, those kind of things, you don't have to be as focused on that. But essentially, if you let your starter go too long and the bubbles disappear and that doming effect, if you see like it looks like it's deflated, and sometimes you'll be able to see a line where it has risen to, and then when it deflates, you'll kind of see some of the starter will stick to the side, but it'll have fallen. So that's just
so you want to bake it before it gets to deflated. You want to
right. Okay. Yes. So the really good time is when it's domed as high as it's going to, and it just starts to deflate a little bit.
Okay.
That is
yours
perfect.
Doing that, or is it?
So I think this could probably rise a little more. I think this one I fed at 11 o'clock this morning.
I joke that it's like having a pet.
It really is.
Specific.
And I did another one at 1 p.m. And this one I actually used warmer water. This one had room temperature water. So I guess we'll probably get into that later, that there are a lot of things that can affect the way that your starter grows or becomes active.
What is the rubber band for?
Oh, good.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that because this is a hack I had no idea.
So I've only recently
Awesome, I can't wait.
I've only recently started doing this, but when I fed it this morning, this is the line where the starter was. And this is how much it's grown since 11 o'clock this morning. So that brings me to another point that really you'd like to see it at least double in size. Einkorn doesn't rise and double, triple as much as other grains. So just keep that in mind if you're baking with Einkorn.
I had actually been working on a starter that Amanda was instructing me how to do, and it isn't actually to the point yet where it's ready to bake with. So we're going to just use hers to show you. But that rubber band trick was really cool.
Yeah, it's just a really nice visual too.
And so if it does not double, then it's not ready to be used for bread. You can use it for anything else that's limited. I mean, the amount that you need it to rise is limited, right?
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And another way you can tell if it's ready to bake with is, if you could get like a clear glass jar, we're going to do a float test.
Oh.
Are you familiar with that, Janice? Have you ever heard of that? So this is a good way to know if it's.
Okay, do you need to
fill it with water if you would.
Oh, fill it with water. Okay, what temperature?
Just cold is fine.
When you feed it, do you use less water with Einkorn than you would use with other flours?
Yes, you do. So Einkorn is notorious for not absorbing water as quickly as conventional wheat. That's good.
Okay.
We just want them to be able to see.
So we have our
and maybe a spoon if you don't mind.
Yes, absolutely.
And if this doesn't work, it might be because I drove with this starter in my car and it might have deflated a little bit. And I should probably show them what that looks like too. So hopefully this will float from the carbon dioxide.
Oh, this looks like donuts.
You can make that. So as I don't know if you can point the.
Yeah, we're gonna try to point the camera down to look at the consistency and texture of this.
So I'm gonna do this one that I haven't.
Okay, cool.
So
yeah, I think that looks good.
Okay.
Can you all see it?
Yes.
Look at that like consistency.
Some stringy striations.
Almost like pizza dough.
Cavernous. You see that? Hopefully the camera
Yeah.
doing it justice. Okay,
yes.
so that's just some visual signs that it's active and ready to be baked with.
Let's see. I'm gonna turn the TV.
Oh, so, okay, so those are visual cues. And then some smell cues would be that, actually, do you want to smell this?
Yeah,
and tell
yeah.
them what you think?
All right, here. Oh, it's kind of pungent.
Does it smell yeasty to you?
Yeah, it definitely smells yeasty. I was thinking silage or like something like that because we're
Probably
farmers.
not far off.
Yeah, it definitely smells like it's fermenting.
So basically what I would be looking for if I'm smelling this is it should be not overly sour. It shouldn't smell alcoholic in any way. If it does have like a really alcoholic, really sour smell to it, then that would indicate that your starter ran out of food, that it's over fermented, that it's developed too much lactic acid, which is a byproduct.
Is it not usable at that point then, or can you feed it enough to get it back?
So do not throw your starter away or give up if you are smelling it be really sour like that. You just give it a couple good feedings and be sure to discard what you, and we'll get to that as part of the.
So would you say overall they're like pretty hardy in that you can bring
you
them
can
back?
skip feedings.
Okay.
Again, we'll get to that, but yeah, that's just some ways to tell that it's ready to be baked with. So that being said, we are going to commence with this recipe.
Okay, I have my big bowl.
Okay, so this recipe that I'm using, which by the way, although this is for Einkorn, I do have similar no knead overnight recipes for spelt and whole wheat. So if anybody would like a copy of that, I'm happy to share.
Ooh, awesome.
Yes.
No, not everybody bakes with Einkorn. But so this recipe is nice because it'll give you like the cup measurements as well as the measurements and weight. And I have found that you'll get the most consistent results. Sorry, I better.
No, you can get in the view.
Bear with me, guys. So I have like starter all over my house. But you'll really get more consistent results if you are able to weigh your flour and your other ingredients out. I mean, you certainly can just, use a regular cup measurements, but
Question for maintain or like for feeding the starter, is the measurements critical? Because okay, good. Because I was just like, nah.
When it comes to actually baking with
consistency.
it,
okay, cool.
bake your actual, baking. I have found at least, maybe others have had different experience, but at least when you're baking, it's helpful to have a kitchen scale. And this one is, it will do both grams and ounces. So usually for baking, you use gram measurements. So this recipe calls for, and actually we're going to need another bowl. I forgot.
Okay, no problem. About the same size? Or?
Yeah.
So are you going to share with us, Amanda, how many or how you start and how you keep your starter going, or how you keep it alive?
So today we'll be talking about how to maintain an existing starter. We won't really talk about starting one from scratch. I mean, there are plenty of like YouTube videos out there that.
Yeah.
No. Okay. But we'll definitely be talking about maintaining today.
Okay.
And that being said, we obviously have plenty of starter and we can make more. So anyone who wants some, just let us know.
Yeah, I have mine going too. So mine's probably a spelt though. More spelts than anything.
Very good. Awesome. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to measure out the water, which is 2 cups of warm water.
Into this one?
Yes.
Okay. A little bit warmer than room temperature?
Just not super warm, just about body temperature.
Okay. 2 cups?
Yes. Okay, so we're going to put it on the scale. And we are going to tare the scale so that it will subtract out the weight of the bowl with the water. So now that it's at 0 grams, we are going to scoop out about 60 grams of starter. That's about a 1/4 cup measurement. So if you want to do about 60 grams, and it's okay if it's a little more.
Okay.
And it's continuing to float.
Yay. Okay, so how many grams again?
60.
Oh, wow, okay. So it looks
We're
like
at
about
45.
four big tablespoons.
Which is a 1/4 cup.
What do you know?
That's And there's some starter left in the jar, so that's what we'll use to keep our starter going. So we're gonna set that aside. And now with a whisk, I didn't get that out,
All right.
sorry.
No problem. Will this work?
Yes, perfect. You'll just whisk the starter in the water so it's like you're breaking up all of the starter. You should be left with just like a slurry. This is gonna help the starter in the water incorporate completely into the mixture.
And is there something about adding air into it?
Yeah, that helps too. Okay, that looks good. So we're gonna set this aside while we measure out the flour into that bowl.
Okay, do we need to zero it?
Yes. Actually, we'll zero it once the bowl is on there. Yeah, there we go, good. Okay, so about 6 cups, or excuse me, 7 1/4 cups of whole grain einkorn.
7 1/4 cups, okay.
But we're also measuring it, and so that's gonna come out to be 696 grams.
So you kind of just watch the
Yeah.
grams as you're measuring?
Yeah.
Okay, that's 1, 2. And I actually ground berries for the very first time. So that's what
Freshly
this
ground
is.
einkorn. Awesome. $4.89.
Okay, this I think is 6. Just tell me when.
Okay, so we're at 628. We need 696. Ooh, close. This is the fun part. Okay. We'll scoop some back out. It's no problem. Can you see? 702?
Yeah. It wasn't like
696.
going up for a minute.
Okay, now we need to add some back. Sorry guys, I know this is riveting.
92.
I can see now why sometimes my bread doesn't work, because I am certainly not that perfectionist.
Well, if you think about it, depending on the humidity that's in your bag of flour or in the room, the temperature of the room, those things all will impact.
Yes, I did it. 696.
Yes. Okay, so 7 1/4 cups of whole grain flour. We're gonna add 1½ teaspoons of sea salt to this.
1½ teaspoons. Okay.
And then just kind of whisk this together so the yeast isn't coming in direct contact with the salt. It's not a huge deal, but
Oh, good point though.
and now you'll probably want to get a stiff spoon so we can combine these two.
All right, wooden spoon on there.
Yep, that's what I use. And usually I would add the dry to the wet. I think we kind of mixed up the bowls. My bad.
Sorry.
That's
was
my
my
bad.
fault.
So you can add the wet to the dry.
Mixing it as I go, or can I just
Just dump it, and then we just want to make sure that we get all of that goodness on there. Okay.
And while I'm mixing, do you want to talk about the starters? Like, because that was all brand new to me. As far as like, so you get your starter from your friend, your local Weston Price chapter, and then how do you maintain it in the fridge?
Well, that's up to the individual too, because there are a couple schools of thought, like one being, it depends on if you're going to be baking with it like every day. Some people leave theirs out at room temperature all the time, and you would feed it twice a day.
Okay.
And if you're like, for myself, I don't have a big family right now, so I just usually will bake once a week or once every 2 weeks. So I often will keep my starter in the fridge until like a day, usually the day before I'm going to be baking. I'll get it back out of the fridge and give it a couple feedings just for good measure.
Could you explain, is this a good time or should we do this first? I didn't know how long it would take me to
Oh,
do it,
really? You're just okay. We'll come back to that,
okay.
But that's we definitely want to talk about that. But so really you're just stirring just so that all of the flour is moistened. You don't want to leave any dry spots. It's really just however long it takes you to get that together, and it's looking really good.
I'll show you guys the consistency right
It's going to be sticky. It's going to be a pretty sticky dough at this point.
And then do we flour our surface now or no?
No, so this is actually all we do until tomorrow morning.
Okay, cool. All right.
So you're really just combining the flour with.
Does that look like?
And that looks exactly how it's supposed to look.
Okay.
So you're just combining the starter with water and more flour and
then I
salt.
just kind of cover it.
So cover it with usually like some type of cling wrap or something where the flour won't dry out overnight.
Okay, so it shouldn't be like a cheese.
And some people will do, like, if you have a plate, you could put over the top. I've done that with some success.
Julia, when you ground the berries, did you use a food mill or a grain mill or a blender?
I think it was some sort of grain mill, like along the lines of a whisper mill. I borrowed my mother-in-law's, or actually I took the berries over there. So that was my first time ever.
So it came out really fine, right? Like a
Yeah, I can show you here. Ooh.
I ground up some in a blender, but I don't know if I did it long enough. It wasn't real powdery. Yeah, that looks like normal flour, right?
Yeah, this is a really nice grind.
So I can text you the type that she has if you're curious. I don't know off the top of my head, but
yeah, that's okay. I've just been using my blender, but I think I should probably get either an attachment to the KitchenAid or the juicer that I have or something.
Yeah. I haven't made it that far in my...
I think if you do use a blender, you need, like I have a blender, but I have a specific, and it's a big heavy blender, but then I have a specific container that you do the dry stuff in versus the liquid.
Oh.
So mine is a Vitamix, and it will get a really fine grind.
That's good to know. It's all good. All right, so this is going to just demonstrate how simple this really is, because you really just combine all those ingredients together and you're going to let it sit for 10 to 15 hours. So overnight works best. So for this loaf that I baked this morning, last night I combined my ingredients together and then was able to bake the next morning. And then we actually have step 2 for you. This morning I also, actually, if we might have a visual cue of, well,
oh yeah.
Just to show how much it.
Oh, is it gonna rise a little bit? Okay, cool.
This morning I started another loaf, and it really grew to the edges of this bowl here.
So was it about half that size?
Probably.
Okay.
It more than doubled, I would say.
Wow.
So at this point, we are going to, you might want to move that.
Yes.
This part always helps to see like a visual of someone doing this.
Should we put the camera down a little bit on the surface?
Yeah.
Okay. Do
So
I need to
like
start
to
the
use,
oven at all yet?
not quite,
Okay,
but we
cool.
will.
Okay.
Oh, and maybe we should talk about that. How to bake it. Okay.
Yeah.
One important element of this recipe that really makes it work is baking it in a Dutch oven or something similar. This is an enamel cast iron pot. There are some workarounds.
Nice.
Yeah, it's.
Ooh,
I was joking with her the other day,
nice
but it's
and
very
heavy.
well loved.
Yeah, it's great.
It's been through a lot. But
Should I show my?
yes, yeah. So Julia does not have one of these, and not everybody has one.
This is my makeshift version.
So-
That's where my other bowl went. This is a pizza stone with a stainless steel bowl, or if you have like a roaster, that could fit. Mine was a little too big. So.
Yeah. So if you have a bigger pizza stone, where you could put the roaster
type.
flipped upside down. So basically, what you're wanting to do is create a lot of steam in the oven, and there are a few ways to do that, but effectively, this is like an oven within an oven. It's going to emulate, a baker's oven. So it's going to create a lot of steam, and it's going to help those yeast do their job to lift it up. So
exciting.
So Julia combined all her ingredients tonight. So tomorrow morning, 10 to 15 hours from now,
it's my practice run.
she is going
right.
to. Okay, I like to use a sieve to kind of help myself flour my surface. And for this part, I like to use an all-purpose einkorn flour just because it's not going to have any of those, the phytic acid and things that we're trying to neutralize through the sourdough process. But you really want to flour. That's probably a little too heavy,
that is so cool.
But I like to use a sieve to do this. That's actually probably too much flour, but we'll survive. So this is going to be extremely sticky. I hope that we can see.
I can manage the camera, I suppose, if you want.
Yeah. So just look for like the consistency that this is. It's really sticky and lots of activity going on. So basically, when we leave this overnight, the way that we get around having to do any kneading is really the yeast and bacteria are doing that for us. They're just working away through it. Okay.
And that is a
this is a
dough
dough
scraper,
scraper,
right? So that's super helpful.
And it's pretty pliable, so you can get every last little bit. Oops. Okay, so this is the kind of tricky part. So this is extremely sticky. Oh, running out of time.
Oops, okay. We have 10 minutes, but we're just gonna go ahead and use the same link and hop right back on if anyone wants to hop back with us. Because I don't think we'll quite get done.
Okay. We're gonna keep moving just so we can. So basically at this point, you're just trying to shape the loaf into a general round shape. And the way that you do that with such a sticky dough as this is I'll kind of just gently flour the top here, but I'm gonna scoop underneath the dough and just flip it.
Ah.
Hopefully you guys can see
Oops,
this.
let me bring it down closer.
So I'm just taking the dough scraper right underneath and just flipping it. Kind of ending up with a sort of round shape. And the flour that we had on the surface is helping us so it's not, the stickiness kind of resolves itself a little bit. So, and if you want to grab that tea towel, so you want something that, you can just put it right there. You want something that's not going to leave any lint. So something like linen or cotton in a bowl. And then you'll pretty generously flour the inside of that so it won't stick when you go to put it in your pot to bake. So I'm just going to use this dough scraper, and it's kind of in a round shape. I hope you can kind of see it maybe.
Here, should we go on this side?
Yeah, I'm just going to flip this over and into the bowl. And it's going to stay here for about 30 minutes while we preheat the oven with our makeshift Dutch oven. So now is when we can turn the oven on to 500.
Okay. So are we should use your Dutch oven since we have it.
All right, okay. So
I mean, if you want, I'm gonna be using my makeshift one tomorrow. We'll use hers.
okay. So you're gonna put the whole thing in the oven at 500 degrees. Oh wait. Move your racks. These are the things that we did not think through. Sorry, guys. Okay, that's good. Okay, so you have it.
It is.
Okay. So that's going to give this about 30 minutes to rise a little bit more in its shape. And then that 30 minutes is going to heat up the Dutch oven. So that way when we put our dough into it, it's going to immediately start generating that steam and lift.
So it's already nice and hot. Then you put the loaf in.
Yes. And I should note, because I made this boo-boo just the other day, last week. So we might want to put a timer on too.
Oh yeah.
So
I'll do like 28.
so after that 30 minutes that it's preheating in the oven, when you're getting ready to put your dough into the Dutch oven, you want to turn the temperature down to 450. I forgot to do that the week ago, and the bread turned out fine, but it just wasn't quite as good as usual. So yeah. So that gives us some time to talk about the starters, since we're waiting 30 minutes to put this in the oven.
Okay. And it's gonna kick us off, but we'll just hop right on it if anyone wants to, join us again for questions and whatever. But I guess you guys go. What questions do you have? What other insights, if you're, more experienced with this all, like, can you share your thoughts? Anyone's welcome to unmute yourself. Let me know if you need help.
If any of you have done some sourdough baking, is this a lot different from what you've done? The types of loaves that you've made?
I just started with Einkorn. I just got some berries last week, and I made some English muffins.
Oh, awesome.
And I had some eggs and cheese on mine. My husband used it for his hamburgers at lunch because we just eat leftovers.
Really versatile.
But I was listening to, I think one was called Pioneering Today. And then there was another one that came up like that on Spotify, because I was just looking up Einkorn. I was painting at our church today, and so I just turn it on and I listen to podcasts. And so I'm all caught up on the Wise Traditions podcast now, and they only come out once a week. And
waiting game.
So the person that I ordered the berries from through a co-op came through this lady, and she said, "Oh, I've been interested in Einkorn, but I've been nervous because I've heard that the water is different." And then I heard today that you use less water.
Yes.
And I remembered that she had said that when I was trying to work with these this morning, because I was thinking, wow, it's really liquidy. And I added some sprouted spelt flour, because I didn't want to use just regular flour since I had already sourdough the other things. So, but I'm really excited to use Einkorns, and I was listening to all the benefits of Einkorn, and I want to switch over now.
Yeah, this is kind of my starting point. Like I started my sourdough journey using Einkorn, so now I'm kind of venturing into spelt and whole wheat and that kind of thing. But I'm really happy with the results that I've gotten so far. And since you're just starting with Einkorn, I really recommend this book. There's several sourdough recipes in here using, obviously, with Einkorn. So.
Amanda, do you keep different starters? Like, I've heard people where they have an Einkorn starter, they have a spelt starter, they have a white flour starter.
Yeah, so technically, really, you can feed your starter any type of flour, especially gluten-containing flours. Any starter will work really well with that.
If you wanted like a specific, you would keep.
Yeah, so it just depends on if you're going to be baking something that's 100% Einkorn a lot. For myself, I intend to keep an Einkorn starter, but I have converted some of my Einkorn starter into a spelt starter now, so because I'm just kind of experimenting with that. But you don't have to do that. You can basically, if I wanted to use my Einkorn starter to make a spelt bread without having a dedicated spelt starter, you might just start feeding it, half Einkorn, half spelt one day, and then the next day do 3/4 spelt, 1/4 Einkorn, just to slowly convert it into that other flour. So again, you can, interchange
Yeah.
with your.
Because I think mine I've like used, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 different flours, just whatever I have on hand and whatever I feel like doing. And so mine is sort of this mix match of all these.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it works.
That's the beauty of
And
it.
it's not, and I don't, so what are the benefits of keeping? Yeah, is there a benefit to keeping? Is there a benefit to keeping like Einkorn starter versus a?
Well, then you wouldn't have to do that build up to your baking. You wouldn't have to get it acclimated to this other flour because you might not get the same type of rise or that kind of thing. So.
Okay.
These are good questions. Any other thoughts?
I was going to chime in and say I was so surprised when she told me the ingredients. She's like, I'm like, okay, what do we need to prep? You know, I want to have everything ready. She's like, flour and water and salt. And I'm like, you're kidding me. Literally, I made that face. I was like, what? So this is
a good moment.
Really fun. Really
Yeah, I think what I find helpful for me is I'm not always having my starter out, so I will get my starter out and get it working really well. And while it's working, I'll use it for pancakes, waffles. I've made crumpets. I mean, we've made all kinds of things that don't require a lot of raise. And then once I know that that's really getting working well and will make a good dough for bread, then I'll start my bread.
Yeah.
Put it all in the freezer. I put my starter back in the fridge and I wait at least, I've probably let it there for a couple of months. And
yes.
it takes a while to pull it back out and get it working again. But again, you can just, and I just freeze all kinds of bread at one time and then work through that and then go back and start again.
Yeah, that's similar to the way I like to do things. I like to do a lot of baking at once, get it in the freezer. But I haven't been brave enough to let my starter go for a couple months like you have.
Yeah.
But I do like to get it out and give it like a feed once a week or every other week.
So I usually make waffles or pancakes with sprouted spelt flour because it's just already sprouted and everything. I just make it when I want to do it. But Sunday I made the sourdough einkorn waffles for the first time. The first time I ground the berries by myself and everything, and every one of them turned out perfect. I loved it.
Wow.
The first one sort of sticks.